Hello, everyone. Welcome to Silicon Global Online. Appreciate you being here with us today. And we have a great show for you lined up with Jeff Chi of Vickers Venture, and he's joining us from Shanghai. So this is our first Zoom session, Silicon Valley to Shanghai. So I hope that you'll really enjoy it. We'll be here for about 1 hour. And we'll go through some of the highlights of Jeff's career and then some of the highlights of his deals and his view of the investment scene in China and US. Actually, Vickers does global investing, so he can really give us a global perspective. Silicon Dragon Ventures, if you don't know us, we publish a weekly newsletter. We publish videos. We do this Ask a VC Anything series, which we started April 3rd with Bill Tai, the first investor in Zoom. We're on WeChat. We're on Twitter. We have our mobile app. You can reach us at news@silicondragonventures.com. That's a little bit about us. And of course, you can see my books all lined up there on the side: Silicon Dragons, Startup Asia, and Tech Titans of China. As I mentioned, we're going to be asking Jeff Chi anything today. So please get your questions ready. Jeff deserves special credit because he joined me at the book launch in Singapore in November when I was there to launch my book in Singapore, and Jeff came and he spoke at that event, and I really appreciate it. So hopefully you can see this photo there of Jeff and me in Singapore. Who is Jeff Chi? Well, Jeff lives in Shanghai. He heads venture investments for Vickers in Asia. He's the past chairman of the Singapore Venture Capital Association, and he's their ambassador as well. He's a board member of Seeds Capital. He's been on the advisory role at the Monetary Authority of Singapore and also in US, National University of Singapore. So Jeff's originally from Singapore, but he's been living in Shanghai for the past 10 years, where a lot of the action is. Jeff is investing from a new fund that's targeting deep tech breakthroughs. We'll get to hear about some of those breakthroughs on this webinar. He's a Cambridge grad, honors. He is a PhD in information systems from MIT. Very impressive background. Jeff, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Good. So we are warming up our questions, and I put these questions up here just to spark the audience to get your questions ready. You can send those in by chat or the Q&A function during our webinar. We'll be taking those questions about 20 minutes into this. So please warm up your questions now, get them online, and so I can vet them and make sure they're very relevant questions. I put up some questions that I thought would spark you to think, will any deal surpass Baidu? Of course, Vickers Venture is the firm, the venture firm that grew out of a very successful investment in Baidu. That investment of $7.5 million back in 2000 led to millions and millions, and Baidu went publicly listed, did very well on NASDAQ, made the investors a lot of money, and led to the development of Vickers Venture. So will any deal surpass Baidu? And for Jeff, since he's been in Singapore and Shanghai and he's investing globally, how does Singapore and Shanghai startups compare? Get your questions ready for Jeff. I finally want to add just one note. We're launching something new with this webinar. We're going to be having an online discussion group at 6 p.m. after this show finishes. So please check your email for those login details, because it is a separate email. We're going to be able to talk to one another and see one another's faces online. So I think it's going to be fun. All right, Jeff.
Yes.
How are you today in Shanghai?
Things are good in Shanghai. Shanghai seems to be opening up. Things in China seems to be there seems to be a semblance of things getting back to normal after COVID-19. We're all, this disease has changed the world. I mean, there isn't a single country that hasn't been affected by this by this situation. So, you know, being here in China, there does seem to be light at the end of the tunnel. The economy seems to be kicking back into normal. People are going back to the office. Things are a little different from before. Everyone's still wearing a face mask. I think social distancing will remain for a while. Travel remains difficult, but there does seem to be getting back to a semblance of ordinary life.
How are you handling it? Are you traveling at all, or how are you managing to do your normal work?
I think one of the challenges moving forward for people in my business is that travel is going to be restricted. At the very least, there's going to be a 14-day quarantine when you go anywhere and a 14-day quarantine when you come back. So the cost of travel from that perspective is going to be difficult, I think. So in a way, we all need to find a way to do business differently. But other than that, it's been refreshing for me. I used to be out of the home at least 200 days a year, and this gives me a lot more time with the kids. So I'm actually handling this quite well.
Well, that's very good. So you're doing your meetings on Zoom or not?
So a lot of them are Zoom meetings, because we are going back into the office is reopening up. So uh, there is some time spent at the office as well. It's just that less time on the road, less
Mm,
time in hotels,
mm,
more time with the family.
yeah. So if you leave Shanghai and go to another city in China, then you do face this 14-day quarantine to go back?
I think another day in another city in China might not be that bad.
Yeah.
They track you. So there's this QR code that you have that sort of flags places you've been to, and if you've been to anywhere where there might have been an outbreak, your QR code flashes red. But if you're green, you're fine. So in a way, they're keeping track of where people have been. Data privacy seems to be taking a back seat these days. It's more important to keep track of people, who they've met, um, where they've been. So there's a little bit of that going on as well.
Is that QR code on WeChat?
That QR code is, I believe that the underlying technology actually tracks the phone, where you've been
Oh,
and all that. It is presented through many ways. So there are dedicated apps that you could download from the government. You could get it through your Alipay account. You could get it through a WeChat mini app. But it's ultimately coordinated by the government and relies on a lot of data coming from the telco. So basically, I think the telco is the one that says this particular phone number, where has this phone been in the last 14 days?
so during the May 1 holiday, then what did most people do? They just stayed put?
Maybe all the people did stay put. The thing with there were a lot of people who tried to get out. It's been quite and the government has been discouraging people to go out. I know people who were turned back on the highways because of the
Oh,
traffic. They were stopped by the traffic police and advised to turn back. Said, "Look, traffic's bad," and all that. They don't really like people moving around too much. I think the less of that happens, the easier it is for them to keep things under control.
right.
Uh, I brought the kids to a hotel here in Shanghai, thinking that it'd be empty, but it was sold out. I mean, that was a big surprise for me and apparently that hotel that I went to was not the only one. Everyone else in Shanghai seemed to have the same idea. I just heard last week that they're opening Disneyland late May. So, and Disneyland Shanghai is going to be the first Disneyland to open globally.
Well, that's good. I'm sure that will be very welcome. The golf course is finally open here in San Mateo County, where I am. I'm in
Right.
Silicon Valley, and the golfers were out for the first time 2 days ago, enjoying this great weather that we're having. It's rather hot here in Silicon Valley lately, and so it's good that things are starting to get back to normal, but we're still on stay at home until the end of the month.
Right.
China ended early. China got out of this fairly early in comparison to the US.
Right. Well, kind of started early too. So I think the amount of time that the Chinese stayed locked up was not small either.
Yeah. Right. So now you have just raised or closed part of a new fund, and I'm wondering how that's going and what it's like for the fundraising climate today, given that it seems that things are going to be more selective. But tell me, how are things going with that aspect of it, and how are you investing some of your new dollars that you've raised?
Right. So late last year we had the first close of the new fund that we're working on. This is Fund 6, and we're targeting 500 million. So our first close was about 200, and we deployed a significant amount of that capital. We've already deployed some of that capital late last year, early this year, before the COVID situation really hit. Fundraising has been since COVID-19 has been different. I think top of mind of a lot of LPs is not investing. It's more about how do we get through this and all that. So,
Right.
but I do get a sense that because Asia got hit a little earlier, I do get a sense that Asian LPs are saying this seems to be going to stick with us for a while. So business has got to go on, and they're trying to find ways to start discussing with potential investments again, and we're getting a little bit of traction from the Asian LPs more so than the Western ones. And I think the Western one will come to soon as well. That this is a new world that we live in. We've got to deal with a new normal. So things are going to be a little different, but life has got to go on. So there's a few things happening in the LP world, and they are pulling the sort of investments in opposite directions. For one, I think there's a lot of talk about private equity venture being a lot more attractive investments because they're not volatile. So you're not hit by the markets with events like COVID-19. They are longer term investments and therefore better for the likes of investors. Yet at the same time, most LPs have this system where they have a predetermined amount of assets deployed in fixed income versus public equity versus alternatives. And this shock in the public equity side is now driving and resulting in funds being over allocated in alternatives. Therefore, they're saying we need to redeploy where we have alternatives and go back into public equities because and all that. I think
Because
investors
private equity is too risky for these limited partners, or what's going on?
no, because if we have a policy that says 40% fixed income like that, 40% public equity, and 20% sort of alternatives, which is private equity, hedge funds, real estate. And then the markets don't get hit with the private equity guys, but get hit on the public equity side. Then all of a sudden, public equity, which used to be 40%, is now say 35%. And that means we need to try and sell down some of our private equity side and put them in the public equity side just to get the balance back.
I see.
So, so yeah, so those two are sort of opposite effects on this. Net, we'll see where things work out. I'm not too sure. We'll see.
Right. Now, I'm interested from a personal aspect, since we're focusing somewhat in the beginning of this more on your career and your views of the venture landscape before we start to talk a little bit more about your deal investing strategy. But
Right.
since you've lived in both Singapore and Shanghai, I'm curious about your view. How does the startup scene compare and contrast? Which place do you find livelier? Which place has better deals? Also, are there any other markets that you're looking at beyond China, Singapore? Are you looking at Hong Kong, for instance? Are you looking at, I know you have deals globally, actually. What's your view of, first, what's your view of Singapore and Shanghai, comparison, contrast? And why did you move to Shanghai? You're originally from Singapore, so
Right.
is that a
So
big step for you?
it was, and I moved here in 2006, and it was, we started the firm in 2005. I moved here in 2006, and the reason for the move was back then, if you wanted to take venture seriously, there wasn't much of a market in Southeast Asia,
Mhm.
and outside the U.S., China was the one that was booming. So I was early in the in venture in China, as you know, and you've written in your books that
Right.
the first wave of companies started around 2000, 2001. um, we had a big breakout of massive tech IPOs around the 2005, 2006 period. And that was when a lot of the early VC funds and their sort of spin outs like us were able to start the venture business here in China. And so so back then it was a little bit of a no-brainer. If I wanted to be a VC, there wasn't much I could do in Singapore. Now we did have a few investments in Southeast Asia at that point in time. We were very, very early in Southeast Asia, but all the action was there in China.
Mhm.
Back then, uh, the whole concept in Chinese venture investing was really the sort of Me Too phenomenon. So it's a copy to China sort of theme. And as the Chinese startup scene evolved, the Chinese started being able to leapfrog some of the
Mhm.
Western business models. The whole mobile internet scene, some of the sort of universal apps like WeChat and all that are sort of very, very Chinese-like innovations. Southeast Asia sort of came about maybe about 7, 8 years ago now. I think that was the wave. I credit the Singapore government for spearheading this effort. The National Research Foundation, in particular in Singapore, uh, basically with the notion of how does Singapore embrace the digital economy? How does Singapore make startups boom in Singapore? Really led the entire drive across Southeast Asia. And with a little bit of government funding, they were able to create what is now a booming Southeast Asian business. So in comparison, I would say the key thing is a time lag. Southeast Asia is probably where China Venture was about 10 years ago.
Mhm.
Uh, in some ways, not even more than 10 years ago, because uh, you know, China had that wave of IPOs, um, um, including the likes of Baidu and Focus Media, some Shanda, the game company. Those were all big IPOs coming out of China in 2005, 2006. Southeast Asia had a few IPOs in, Sea, Garena, Razer, about 2.5 years ago now. And so that steady stream hasn't really come yet. And that was really what sort of is going to drive the next wave of investments in South Asia. So Southeast Asia is booming. It's grown a lot in the last 5 years. I think total investments in Southeast Asia has gone up from the hundreds of millions to the billions. So it's gone up tenfold at least. But when people ask me how I think it's going to happen, I say it hasn't really started yet. Once the exits prove themselves, the institutional investors will look into Southeast Asia big time. So it's still early days.
Right. Well, what's your view of Hong Kong? Because I often hear Hong Kong and Singapore in the same sentence.
I have to be careful about Hong Kong because I see some people on the attendee list that I know from Hong Kong. but but I think Hong Kong's a little challenged, and it needs in a way to find its place. It's living in it's marketing itself, I think, as a gateway into China. But investments in China are easy to get to. Then being a Hong Kong startup might remain difficult because it is still Hong Kong. It is not very much on the ground in very much on the ground in China, and so when VCs look at Hong Kong startup that has a big Chinese business model, it's like, but you're not in China. You're here in Hong Kong, and what's that removed, and does that necessarily handicap you in any way? So I think those are some of the questions that people would ask in relation to Hong Kong.
Yeah, those are difficult decisions to make and difficult factors to weigh.
Yeah. Hong Kong has had a very tough year. Started with the riots and the protests. I think the only people were beginning to say, is this ever going to end? The only reason that it seemed to have ended was because of COVID-19. There was something else more urgent to deal with. That the protests and the political stability is still something that's looming in the background. We'll see if we come out of that. But I feel for Hong Kong. I think it does indeed still have some challenges ahead of it.
Right. So we do have a person on the Q&A here. He is a private equity professional in Hong Kong, and he wants to know about some of your, and it's Matt and Lori, by the way. Thank you, Matt, for joining us. So he wants to know, what are some of your favorite investment ideas now? And this is something that I wanted to segue into anyhow, to talk about some of your really fascinating deals and your breakthrough deals that you've invested in recently. We'd really like to hear about your broad portfolio.
Yeah, hi, Matt. I've known Matt since the time that he was in Beijing, before he moved to Hong Kong. And yeah, so in terms of investment strategy, today we are. And we started off as generalist Pan-Asian investors. We've evolved into global deep tech investors. And that evolution has been a result of our view of risks of VC investments. So we looked at what we were good at and where we didn't do too well. And so one of the things that we realized was was in relation to a lot of the consumer internet companies. Uh, a lot of it was left to chance, and we seemed pretty good at guessing intelligently, but there was still a very big luck element to that. And so we're saying, how do we filter out that luck element? So because if we look at our home run rate, which we define as 5 times investment and above, we're generally about a third historically, and then maybe about 7, 8 years ago, we started looking more towards the technology side, hoping to get to about 50% home run rate.
Yeah.
And it looks like that strategy is working out based on more recent numbers that we have and all that, and that was really factoring out if we decide to focus more on the technology and less on whether or not people like this new game or this new social app and all that in terms of trying to guess whether there is a market for a product like that. But going after companies where we know there is a market, but there is more risk perhaps on whether the technology would work, whether the team could implement the technology, that's sort of where we focus. I like to describe our business as finding breakthrough technologies that solve big problems, because attached to a big problem is a very big, large, known market. But the other aspect of that is in this part of Matten's question that I saw, that in relation to if you solve big problems and these are pressing global issues, we're also creating some benefit for humanity and for mankind. We don't call ourselves an impact fund. I haven't found the right narrative for this yet, because a lot of people associate impact funds with suboptimal returns, which we're not about. We are about generating returns for our investors, but the fact of the matter is a lot of the stuff that we do does create a lot of impact for the world.
Sure. Well, when we were getting prepared for this webinar, I took a whole page of notes from you. Wow. And this is all very small print as well. So Jeff has a lot of deals, really interesting deals to talk about. And one of the ones that captured my imagination, well, a couple of them did, but the one that is repurposing for COVID-19 vaccines out of Oxford. And then the other one, the Fountain of Youth Company in San Diego. Can you talk a little bit about these deals and why Vickers did those deals?
Sure. So Mergex is a company that we invested out of Oxford. These guys have developed a methodology and a platform for vaccines, and the platform is really T cell based vaccines. So prior to COVID-19, we made the investment late last year, and they basically were tackling various infectious diseases, hand, foot, and mouth, and working with Singapore on that. We're working with Brazil on Zika, working with Singapore and the Philippines on dengue. So we're tackling a lot of these diseases. And with COVID-19, the company decided to dedicate some resources to start looking into some of these to try to help solve the problems. Mm-hmm. So pretty much in the spotlight these days. But if for those of you who have an interest in this in the space, there is a growing concern that the traditional approach of using antibodies for vaccines doesn't work for the likes of coronavirus, which is an RNA virus. And one of the reasons is because that the virus mutates more quickly than typical viruses. But to make things worse, there's this thing called ADE, which is an immunity resistance that basically hijacks the antibodies that are in your body to attack your body. And effectively, this is one of the reasons why older people tend to have more severe symptoms than young people, simply because they've had more history with antibodies, having lived on this planet for a more extended period of time. And yeah, so the approach that Mergex takes is with T cells rather than with antibodies. And I think from what we understand, of the hundreds some companies that are trying to develop a vaccine, they're the only one with the T cell based approach.
How far along are they?
They are starting. Starting sort of animal trials soon, and like anyone else, probably 18 months away from actually being able to sell. I think it really depends on how quickly sort of FDA and all that walks them through. There are some companies that have been giving a waiver to go straight into human trials without doing the animal studies, but we'll see. They're working on this. Yeah.
Well, Brad Armstrong has a question. I know he's in New Mexico. Hi, Brad. And Brad has a question that's related to this. Are you going to be focusing more of your portfolio, you're investing on these kinds of preventative medicine measures? Is that going to become more of a focus of your fund in general?
So like I say, our key strategy is really about, solving big global problems. So healthcare, life sciences is one of them. I'd say maybe slightly more than a third, close to 40% of what we do today, but we've got other things in the portfolio, like geothermal energy, like trying to solve the plastics problem. So there are, yes, it's a large part of what we do, but not purely what we do.
All right.
Yeah.
I remember when I was talking with Fannin, the fellow who actually did the Baidu investment and helped to set up Vickers with you and a few other partners. And he was talking to me, we were actually in Hong Kong, he was telling me about this deal in San Diego that you have, that I guess it reverses aging. It can cure baldness, it can cure wrinkles. It's sort of the fountain of youth companies. Tell us about that company. What's the name of it? Why
Sure.
did you invest in it?
So Samumed is a company based out of San Diego, and we spent a year in due diligence before we had the guts to invest in this company, because it all sounded too good to be true.
Right.
What happened was what they really do is, and Fountain of Youth is one way to describe them. My partner, when he first met them, the Khalil Bin who first found the deal, basically say, you guys got to come in and meet this company. They have God's pill, and it really, fundamentally what they do is they found a way to drug the Wnt pathway. The Wnt pathway, spelled WNT, is a pathway that basically controls cell and tissue differentiation. So as we are conceived in a single cell embryo and our cells start splitting and duplicating, eventually there needs to come a time where cells differentiate from each other. And it is a Wnt pathway that sort of guides that, how that differentiates. So there are stem cells within our body that could evolve into different cells, and what cell they actually evolve into is controlled by the Wnt pathway. So for instance, in the fluid in our knee joint are some stem cells that are fairly evolved, but they're not fully evolved, and they would evolve eventually either into cartilage or into bone. and it is a Wnt pathway that sort of balances how much cartilage and how much bone. As a person ages, that pathway basically guides these stem cells to produce more bone than cartilage, and basically I think we stop cartilage production in our middle years, like 40ish, 50ish, and all that. And so that's why osteoarthritis is a serious problem. It afflicts everyone eventually because the cartilage eventually wears out. And Summilmed has a drug that basically changes that Wnt signal to say, please generate a little bit more cartilage. So a single injection will generate a millimeter or two, which is sufficient for another 10 years. And it's a large market. So I think some of the numbers suggest that if you think about the knee replacement market, because the only real cure and help for osteoarthritis is knee replacement. A lot of older people who have milder symptoms of it basically go through pain treatment, but it doesn't solve the problem, and it will deteriorate over time. It's just a matter of how much deterioration and all that. So in the same instance, they have drugs to control the Wnt pathway to start growing hair again. They have drugs to start growing collagen under the skin again. They have a drug that connects nerve cells and nerve tissues that solves paralysis. So it really does. When we did the deal, and they've got a working model for Alzheimer's. They've got, they and the reason my partner said God's pill was because he saw a video of animal studies that basically took a crippled mouse, and that mouse was walking again in a couple of weeks, running again actually in a couple of weeks. He saw sort of mice that were blind and could see again, and so the lame walk and the blind see. So that's kind of how he said, I saw God's pill today. So, but it's amazing the stuff that they can do. And for the first time in the history of medicine, we now have a drug that actually can grow things instead of kill things. Because if you think about it, drugs have always been about killing bad things in the body. And the science has come a way where we now understand enough about the human body to help in and to regrow things. Yeah. So Summilmed does believe that if a fraction of the drugs that they have in the pipeline hit the market, and with the collaboration of other companies similar to them, that we should expect life expectancy, certainly within our lifetime, to increase from where it is 80 today to maybe about 130. So good news for everyone. We're all going to live longer.
Well, is this going to be commercialized anytime soon?
I think we should expect the first drugs to come out: osteoarthritis, alopecia for the hair. We've got a couple of cancer products coming out soon as well. Probably the first drugs to hit the market late 21, early 22. So osteoarthritis is in phase 3 right now. We have orphan drug status for pancreatic cancer, and that means that we have an accelerated FDA program. So our first drug should hit the market in slightly less than 2 years.
I see. How much has Vickers invested in this company? Or you can't say, Jeffrey? How much has Vickers invested in that company in San Diego?
We have just shy of 3% in that company.
Okay.
And the last round valuation there was 12 billion.
Okay, wow. Do you think this is going to be a hit like Baidu in that kind of sphere or not?
Yeah, so one of your leading questions was, is there
Right.
anything going to surpass Baidu? And actually, we've got a few companies in the portfolio that we think are going to be bigger than Baidu. So yeah.
All right. Are
So
there
we're very
any
excited
deals that
about.
you're very excited about that one, right? And the one from Oxford, and two other ones that you told me about, the geothermal energy company in Canada and the fully
Yeah,
biodegradable recycling materials company in Georgia. These are definitely deep tech. These are not consumer companies. So
right. So
that fits your strategy.
yeah, yeah. So geothermal energy has been around for a while, and it's been relatively expensive because it's been very relatively inefficient. Traditionally, geothermal energy. Uh, uh, by the way, the name of the company is Ever, spelled Eavor. One of the thinkings that they thought when they came up with the name was energy forever.
Okay.
Am I coming across clear? Because I think I'm getting a little. The network seems to be
Yeah, you cut out at one moment, but I hear you now. And we have a really good question I see on the screen here from Farouk Jamal, who I know. I think you know him, and I know him as well. And he wants you to talk about
but
some of
yeah,
the
or
deals.
geographically,
Yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
yeah. So traditionally, they need to be close to what they call the Ring of Fire.
Uh,
Um, Look for water source underground, and essentially they pump up that hot water and basically extract the heat from there. But these guys have been able to, in a way, create a closed loop.
mhm,
Part of the closed loop meaning that they can rely on the basic principle that hot water rises to siphon the energy out. One of the problems with geothermal is that the pumps that you use to pump the water out is takes up 60% of the energy that generated, and
mhm,
therefore relatively inefficient. But with their system, they actually don't need a pump, and therefore the efficiencies are very high. They have a new version under development that allows them to build to go 5 times deeper. So right now, the first version is 3 kilometers deep. So they're intending to dig 15 kilometers deep, and that will bring them on in within the same realm of traditional coal-fired plants. They're drastically going to bring energy, renewable energy costs down.
oh,
And feel
fascinating.
free. Yeah. So yeah, it is a very exciting space. Certainly well needed in this day and age as we become more aware of the damage that the use of fossil fuels are
Mm,
going to have on the planet.
right.
Not just because they're not renewable, but also because of the pollution that it causes.
Okay, let's get to Farouk's question here. Farouk Jamal wants to know about reasons that you may have passed on some deals that later turned out to be successful. That's a good question.
Yeah, it's part and parcel of the business, and I can't begin to start citing what they are. I think the key thing is for me that I always say is that at least we saw them, and that means that the deal flow is healthy. That means we're connected to the right people, and all that. The reasons we pass are manifold, and very often I ask myself those same questions. If we had the same choices today, would we still decide in the same way, right? And very often the answer is yes. No regrets for not making the investment. We missed the whole Chinese e-commerce wave, for instance. We did not invest into e-commerce. And we had the strategy that we wanted to make a few e-commerce bets early in the day. This was, post Taobao, post Alipay, that we say now that the ecosystems develop, because if you think about e-commerce in China, the first growth really came from C2C, and Alibaba really solved the payment issue and the logistics issue with Alipay, and then we say it's ready for B2C e-commerce. But we couldn't differentiate between the companies that we saw. Everyone that came that we spoke to had pretty much the same strategy. So unless we were prepared to say, and Sequoia basically took this approach, by the way, which is we're gonna bet in a wide variety of e-commerce companies, and some of them will stick, right? That wasn't what we were about, and yes, maybe we could think about that way, that says e-commerce is a trend, and therefore we should invest in every e-commerce company that we find. But we weren't that because of the fund size that we had. And so we couldn't really find differentiating factors to say this guy is going to win over the rest of the pack because they're better, they've got a better understanding of the market, or an unfair advantage, and all that. So we knew that one of them was going to win. We just didn't know which one, and we couldn't decide between which companies to back. Other reasons, I think sometimes we're concerned about integrity issues that we choose not to, and I won't mention names, but there are companies that have done very, very well for their investors, but because of certain integrity issues that we found with founders and past dealings, we decide not to invest. But yeah, so you can't really live life regretting not making an investment. I think I think that's part of the business.
So you are mostly doing deals outside of China now today. And this seems to be a trend of other Asia VCs of doing deals outside of China. So the question is, and it's posed by an attendee here, wants to know about how competitive are you with domestic VCs? For instance, those in Sand Hill Road or those in Boston?
Right.
Boston.
So we're quite different from our peers in Silicon Valley, and we're still very much Asian VC. A lot of what we do have an Asian angle. Our whole notion of going global is we can't be myopic and look at a technology company in China, for instance, or in Singapore, for instance, and say this is best of breed in China, therefore it's best of breed globally, right? We because it is more often than not, we are caught in situations where our competitor doesn't come from the domestic market, our competitor comes from an international market. So if we're invested in an AI company here in China, the competing technology may be out of Israel, and that Israeli company does a joint venture with someone here, then that becomes a problem. So we really need to understand what's happening on the global scale. We see our peers and in sort of local markets as allies as opposed to competitors. Very often we co-invest with them. It's our key angle is we're global. We can help portfolio companies on a global scale. We just opened an office in London last year, trying to look at the European markets, but not just from a viewpoint as to making investments in Europe, but also being able to connect our portfolio companies with the relationships that we have there. So we're invested into an AI company out of San Francisco that focuses on drug discovery called Atomwise. and we're co-invested with the likes of Baidu and Tencent in the same round. But uh, uh, but when it comes to Asian expansion and Asian exploration, the company is asking us for help rather than for them for help, because um, they are afraid that they're strategic, and they may have a separate agenda for helping the company, and being financial investors, we're relatively independent. So yeah, I don't think I don't see ourselves as competing with these guys and needing to be competitive. We're just different. We're just, our key angle is how do we help you outside of your home markets.
Right. So Anthony Gaiva wants to know, how did your firm develop a competitive advantage for being a deep tech investor?
Once we made the realization on being a deep tech firm, we really needed to do two things, right? And we have a very large team for what we do. One of the aspects that I mentioned earlier on, just before this, was the globalization, right? So as a result of that, we needed a global team. And so in the last 5 years, we've been hiring globally, and we've been establishing a global. The other thing that we needed to do was we needed deeper expertise in particular areas of interest. So, our investment team today is about 25 people, uh, with about a third of us having PhDs. And on a typical deal, the roles that we play, somebody finds a deal, does the business deep dive on that, but also at the same time there needs to be a deep understanding of the technology to be able to go in and read the technical papers associated with the field that we're looking at, being able to assess whether or not this technology is best of breed or not, being able to understand whether or not parallel technologies would likely disrupt this particular area that we're looking at. So the expertise is deep and primarily driven by the diverse team that we have.
Well, certainly your background as an engineer, information systems, all of these areas that give you a very good grasp of what could work and what might not work in this case.
And my Fannin and my mantras has always been, let's try and hire people smarter than us.
That could be difficult.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I'm very happy with the team that we have right now, that how we're positioned, the capabilities that the team has. Yeah.
How many deals are you expecting to do this year? And how many have you done already this year?
Um, this year, I think we've done like 5 deals so far, and all within the first quarter. Generally, we do about 10, 15 deals a year. I think this year will be slower. We've certainly slowed down investments since the COVID situation sort of globalized, primarily driven by uncertainty as to where the markets are going to be. So we're sort of adopting a wait and see approach. We're also very focused on just helping our portfolio companies steer through this crisis. So the same stuff that people talk about, which is
Yeah.
how do you extend your runway? Are there new opportunities for you to go after in the new normal? How do you position yourselves? Yeah.
How much time are you spending on helping these companies that are dealing with the COVID-19 issues, the economic issues?
I'd say these days I spend about 80% of my time with the portfolio companies over a wide variety of issues. Some of them not just COVID-19 related, but certainly, uh, you know, maybe more than half that time is COVID-19. Startups all generally historically have around a 2-year runway when they're first funded anyways. And so we're advising all our companies to try and stretch the runway to at least 12 months because fundraising is going to be difficult. So
Oh,
a lot
yeah.
of is helping them fundraise and explore opportunities that they could go after. Yeah.
Okay, well, this has been very interesting. And I do appreciate all the great questions, very, very good questions, good quality questions. And as I mentioned before, we are going to be having this discussion group afterwards. But we're going to have a little bit of a pause before we go into the discussion group. You're going to be receiving an email in about 5 minutes time with the login for the Zoom meeting. The Zoom meeting will be different from this one, and that we'll actually see one another's faces, and we can actually talk with one another. And I think Jeffrey just got up in order to do one of our traditions now that we have developed here at Silicon Global Online. And we'll see that in a moment. And hopefully those who are on West Coast time can join us. And I think Jeff is going to be having coffee while I'm having maybe a sip of wine. And I would, yeah, so I'm going to have my sip of wine here while I thank our sponsor, Invest Hong Kong. Thank you, Invest Hong Kong, for being with us. Please contact Lawrence Tang in San Francisco. There's his email in case you're interested in Hong Kong. There it is, Lawrence. And please join us for the discussion group afterwards. Please check your email coming in about 3 minutes. And the Zoom meeting will start at 6 p.m. California time, 9 a.m. time in Asia. And we have a lot of people joining up for that. I hope that we can have a great discussion there. So thank you for joining us. If you liked what you saw today, please join us again. Please check out all of our products here that you can see, videos, mobile app, our weekly newsletter. And next week, since we've been doing this show, we've been doing it every Thursday. So next week we have Cameron Ansari from New York City. And he's with Graycroft. He's also a lead investor in Pinterest. And we'll get to hear about the Pinterest story of being in China. I think that'll be very interesting. I'm going to stop now and thank you again. And thank you, Jeff, for joining us. It was very enlightening to hear about all those deep tech stories. Yes. All right. We'll see you online soon. Thank you. Bye now.
Bye.
Bye now.